The courtroom was silent, so silent that you could hear the sharp echo of Pam Bondi's heels striking the marble floor. The former Florida Attorney General moved with her usual confidence, her gaze steady, her posture perfect. Every camera in the room followed her, every reporter ready to capture her next move. But what happened next, no one saw coming. As Pam stood to speak, Judge Harold Morrison slammed his gavel down so hard that even the stenographer flinched. "Miss Bondi," he said coldly, "you may be used to playing politics, but this is a court of law, not a campaign stage." Gasps rippled through the room. Reporters froze mid-sentence. The defense attorney's jaw dropped. Pam's expression didn't change. Her calm face hid a storm of emotion, but her eyes, they told the story. They narrowed, just slightly, a flicker of restrained anger flashing within them. The insult wasn't just harsh, it was personal. Everyone in that courtroom knew Pam Bondi wasn't someone to humiliate and walk away from. She was known for her sharp mind, her sense of justice, and her ability to expose corruption where others feared to look. That day, Judge Morrison made the biggest mistake of his career. The case at hand was explosive, politically and legally. Pam was representing a whistleblower who had exposed a powerful state senator accused of misusing public funds for private gain. The senator's allies had tried everything to silence her client, from threats to bribery, but Pam refused to back down. She took the case head-on, knowing it would ruffle feathers in the wrong places. But Judge Morrison, however, didn't like the attention the case was getting. He had a reputation for arrogance and an ego that couldn't handle strong, outspoken lawyers, especially women like Pam. From the very first hearing, he interrupted her repeatedly, mocked her statements, and even rolled his eyes when she spoke. He dismissed valid objections and even sneered at her evidence. "Maybe, he said, smirking, "maybe you should leave law to professionals, Miss Bondi. You seem more comfortable in front of cameras than in a courtroom." Reporters whispered, cameras clicked, and the tension thickened. Pam didn't respond. She calmly gathered her notes, gave the judge a polite smile, and said, "Your Honor, I'll remember that." And she did. That night, Pam sat alone in her office staring out the window at the city lights. She could have ignored the insult. Many lawyers would have. After all, going against a judge was risky, career-ending even. But something about Judge Morrison's behavior didn't feel random. His anger seemed defensive, like he had something to hide. Pam's instincts, sharpened by years of fighting corruption, told her there was more beneath the surface. So she called one of her most trusted investigators. "Look into Morrison," she said quietly. "Everything. His finances, his connections, his past rulings." Days turned into weeks, and soon the truth began to unfold, and it was uglier than she imagined. Morrison was approving shaded construction permits for a company run by a wealthy developer, the same man who had donated thousands of dollars to his wife's charitable foundation. Now Pam had bank statements, recorded calls, and confidential emails, all pointing to judicial corruption. She could have gone public immediately, but Pam Bondi didn't rush. She built her case carefully, piece by piece, until the evidence was airtight. A month later, the courtroom was once again full. Reporters sat ready, expecting another fiery session between the famous Pam Bondi and the arrogant judge. Judge Morrison entered, looking smug and confident. He had no idea that two federal agents were sitting quietly in the back row. Pam approached the bench calmly, holding a thick folder. "Your Honor," she said evenly, "I'm here to submit new evidence for the record." The judge sighed. "Let's not waste more time with your theatrics, Miss Bondi." Pam smiled slightly. "Oh, I assure you, Your Honor, this won't take long." She handed the folder to the clerk. The judge flipped through it, frowning. His face slowly turned pale as he realized what he was looking at. Proof of his own secret dealings. Pam stepped forward. "Those are records of illegal financial transactions tied to your signature. The federal agents behind you have been investigating this for weeks." The agents rose to their feet. Judge Harold Morrison, you are under arrest for corruption and obstruction of justice." The courtroom erupted. Reporters shouted questions, flashbulbs exploded, and for once Morrison had nothing to say. Pam stood quietly, watching as the same man who had insulted her in public was led away in handcuffs. Outside the courthouse, cameras surrounded Pam again. "Miss Bondi, did you plan this?" a reporter shouted. Pam smiled softly. "No, justice doesn't need to be planned. It just needs someone brave enough to stand up for it." The clip went viral within hours. Millions watched it online, praising her composure and courage. Pam's quiet words became a quote repeated across the nation, a symbol of strength against corruption. She didn't just win a case that day, she restored faith in justice.
A few weeks earlier, Pam Bondi had been representing a high-profile whistleblower, a brave woman who claimed that a powerful state senator was using public funds for personal luxury projects. The case was political dynamite. It wasn't just another corruption case. It had the potential to shake the foundations of state politics. Everyone in the city was talking about it. When the hearing began, the courtroom was overflowing. Journalists filled every seat. Cameras clicked non-stop, and whispers buzzed through the crowd like electricity. People knew something big was about to happen. Pam Bondi, known for her calm confidence and sharp legal skills, stood at the center of attention. Dressed in a simple dark suit, she looked composed, professional, and determined. But not everyone in that courtroom wanted her to succeed. Judge Harold Morrison was presiding over the case, a man with a reputation for arrogance and an unpredictable temper. He was the kind of judge who enjoyed control, the kind who liked being the smartest person in the room. And rumor had it, he didn't like Pam's political fame one bit. To him, she was just a celebrity lawyer chasing headlines. He thought she was there for attention, not justice. The moment the hearing began, his attitude made that clear. As Pam began her opening statement, carefully laying out the evidence of the senator's financial misconduct, Judge Morrison interrupted her almost immediately. "Ms. Bondi," he said sharply, "please spare us the grand speeches. This isn't a campaign rally." A few chuckles came from the back of the courtroom, but Pam ignored them. She took a quiet breath and continued, her voice steady. Moments later, as she explained how public funds had been funneled into private real estate projects, the judge rolled his eyes dramatically. "Do you have actual proof, or are we just dealing with assumptions and theories today?" he said with a smirk. Pam paused for half a second, her expression calm. "Your Honor, all of my evidence is documented and verified," she replied firmly, holding up a folder of papers. Still, Judge Morrison didn't back down. He leaned back in his chair and muttered just loud enough for the courtroom to hear, "It sounds like a publicity stunt to me." Immediately, reporters began scribbling notes. Cameras flashed non-stop. You could feel the energy shift. Pam, however, didn't lose her composure. She knew when to fight and when to observe. Losing her cool in front of the cameras would only make things worse. So she stayed calm, presenting her evidence with quiet confidence, refusing to let his words shake her. But the judge didn't stop. As the hearing went on, his tone grew more sarcastic and condescending. Every time Pam tried to make a point, he cut her off. Every time she introduced evidence, he questioned its authenticity. Finally, as the session neared its end, Morrison leaned forward with a smug smile. "You know, Ms. Bondi," he said loud enough for everyone to hear, "maybe you should stick to TV interviews instead of courtrooms. You might be better at acting than arguing." The room fell completely silent. Even the sound of typing stopped. Everyone's eyes turned toward Pam. It was the kind of insult that could end a career, delivered publicly by a sitting judge. For a brief moment, Pam didn't move. Her expression was unreadable, her face calm and composed. But behind her stillness, her mind was racing. She knew this wasn't just unprofessional, it was deeply unethical. A judge was supposed to remain neutral, not humiliate an attorney in open court. Slowly, she gathered her files, neatly stacking them together. Then she looked up at the judge and spoke in a calm, steady tone that carried through the entire room. "Your Honor, I'll remember that." There was something about the way she said it, the certainty in her voice, the quiet strength that made even the spectators uneasy. It wasn't a threat, it wasn't anger, it was a promise. As Pam walked out of the courtroom, the air buzzed with whispers. Some people pitied her, others admired her composure. But no one, not even the judge, realized that she had just decided to uncover something far bigger than one insult. That moment wasn't the end of the story. It was the spark. The judge thought he had humiliated Pam Bondi and made her look weak, but in reality, he had just challenged the wrong person. Because while most people would have walked away, Pam wasn't built like that. She believed in accountability and she had a powerful intuition. Something about the judge's behavior that day felt personal, defensive, and strangely desperate. Later that evening, as she replayed the scene in her mind, she couldn't shake the feeling that Judge Morrison's outburst wasn't just arrogance, it was fear. The kind of fear that comes from having secrets. And that's when Pam decided to find out what those secrets were. She picked up her phone, dialed her investigator, and said, "I need everything on Judge Harold Morrison. His finances, his connections, his rulings. Don't miss a thing." The real fight, she knew, was only beginning.
ChatGPT said, later that night, Pam sat alone in her dimly lit office, the soft glow of her desk lamp casting long shadows on the walls. The silence was heavy, broken only by the ticking of the clock and the faint hum of the city outside. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the files spread out before her, replaying every second of what had happened earlier in court. The judge's words echoed in her mind. Maybe you should stick to TV interviews instead of courtrooms. It wasn't the first time she'd faced arrogance or condescension. Pam Bondi had dealt with plenty of that during her years in politics and law. But something about Judge Harold Morrison's tone bothered her more deeply. It wasn't just rudeness. It wasn't even about ego. There was something else behind it, a kind of nervous hostility, like a man hiding something. Pam had always trusted her instincts, and that night those instincts screamed that Morrison's behavior wasn't random. His constant interruptions, his smirks, his irritation, they all pointed to something deeper. She sat forward, her sharp eyes narrowing. "He wasn't just trying to embarrass me," she whispered to herself. "He was trying to discredit me." Why would a respected judge risk his reputation just to humiliate one attorney in front of the press? Unless, of course, he had a reason to fear what she might uncover. Pam decided she couldn't let it go. She picked up her phone and called one of her most trusted investigators, a man named David Heller, a retired FBI agent known for his quiet efficiency and attention to detail. When he answered, she didn't waste a second. "David, I need you to look into someone for me," she said firmly. "Judge Harold Morrison." There was a pause on the line. "That's a big name, Tam. What are we looking for?" "Everything," she said. "His finances, his rulings, any connections to developers, politicians, donors. I want it all." David didn't ask why. He simply said, "Consider it done." For the next several days, Pam tried to focus on her case, but her thoughts kept drifting back to Morrison. Every time she remembered his smug smile, her resolve hardened. She wasn't driven by revenge, she was driven by justice. If there was corruption behind that bench, she was going to expose it. A week later, David walked into her office with a thick folder under his arm. His expression told her everything before he even spoke. "You were right," he said quietly, setting the file on her desk. Pam's eyes widened slightly.
What did you find? He opened the folder, revealing a series of documents, bank transfers, property records, and tax filings. Over the past 2 years, he began, Judge Harold Morrison has approved multiple construction permits for a company called Lakeview Development Group. Every one of those projects had irregular approval timelines, faster than normal, fewer inspections, less oversight. Pam frowned, scanning the papers. That sounds suspicious, but not illegal on its own. David nodded. True, but here's where it gets interesting. He handed her a second document, a record of charitable donations. The CEO of Lakeview Development, a man named Victor Delmar, made several large donations, each one to a foundation registered under the name of his wife. Pam's stomach sank. His wife's charity? That's exactly it, David explained. On paper, it looks clean, but that charity has no real operations, no employees, no active projects, just a shell organization. Money goes in and disappears. Pam sat in stunned silence. The implications were enormous. This wasn't a one-time bribe. It was a systematic kickback scheme, hiding behind the facade of philanthropy. A sitting judge using his wife's charity as a laundering channel for developer money. It was the kind of scandal that could destroy the integrity of the entire judicial system. She leaned back slowly, exhaling. So that's why he went after me, she murmured. He thought my case could lead somewhere close to him. He was scared. David nodded. And when powerful people get scared, they lash out. Pam stared at the folder again, her mind racing. This wasn't something she could expose recklessly. She needed to be strategic. Morrison was still a judge, powerful, connected, and dangerous if cornered. Any wrong move could make her look like she was pursuing a personal vendetta. So she decided to play it smart. Over the next few weeks, Pam quietly gathered more evidence. She requested court records, traced donation trails, and had her team analyze the timelines of Morrison's rulings. Every piece fit perfectly into the puzzle. She obtained bank statements that showed suspicious transfers from the developer's offshore accounts. She found emails where Morrison hinted at favorable treatment in exchange for continued support. She even got access to a few recorded phone calls where intermediaries discussed keeping the judge happy. Each discovery made her both thrilled and furious. The same man who had mocked her professionalism in front of cameras was now exposed as the very thing he pretended to despise: corrupt, dishonest, and compromised. One evening, as Pam flipped through the growing pile of evidence, David looked at her and said, "You've got enough to bury him, Pam. What's next?" Pam didn't look up. Her voice was calm, almost cold. She said, "Not bury him. Just let the truth speak for itself." She closed the folder and tapped it lightly with her hand. "He used his power to humiliate me," she added quietly. "Now that same power will turn against him. All I need is the right moment." Pam Bondi wasn't seeking revenge. She was preparing justice. And deep down, she knew, when that moment came, Judge Morrison wouldn't even see it coming.
A month later, Judge Harold Morrison walked into his courtroom like he always did. Chin high, expression firm, and confidence radiating from every step. The courtroom was packed, as usual, with journalists and spectators eager to see another fiery exchange between him and Pam Bondi. He didn't know it yet, but this was the day his world would collapse. The murmur of voices filled the air as the judge took his seat. He adjusted his robe, cleared his throat, and banged the gavel once to bring the room to order. What he didn't notice was that 2 men in dark suits had quietly taken seats in the back row. Federal agents, waiting patiently for the right moment. A few minutes later, the doors opened and Pam Bondi walked in.
She moved with the same quiet confidence that had once irritated him so deeply. The sound of her heels echoed against the courtroom floor, drawing everyone's attention. She carried a thick folder in her hands, her face calm but her eyes sharp with purpose. "Good morning, Your Honor," she said smoothly, her voice even and professional. Judge Morrison glanced at her with a faint smirk. "Miss Bondi," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm, "I assume you're here to give us another performance today?" Pam didn't react. She simply walked toward the front and placed the folder gently on the clerk's desk. "I'm here," she replied, "to submit new evidence for review." The judge sighed loudly and leaned back in his chair. "New evidence in this case? Miss Bondi, we've already wasted enough time on your theatrics. Let's not make this courtroom into a stage for your political ambitions." Pam's lips curved into a faint, composed smile. "Oh, I assure you, Your Honor," she said softly, "this won't take long." The courtroom went silent. Even the reporters stopped typing. Pam motioned to the clerk to hand the folder to the judge. He took it lazily at first, flipping through the pages with the same arrogance he always showed, until his eyes caught something unusual. The color slowly drained from his face. He stopped turning pages. His smirk disappeared. He looked up at Pam, his voice trembling slightly. What is this supposed to be?" Pam took a step forward, her expression unchanging. "It's a record of your personal involvement in unauthorized financial transactions. Federal investigators have been reviewing them for weeks." The room froze. Every journalist leaned forward. Every spectator held their breath. Morrison's hands trembled as he looked back at the folder. Inside were copies of emails, transaction logs, and recorded transcripts, all showing clear connections between the judge, a private developer, and a string of suspicious donations made to his wife's so-called charity. "This is outrageous!" the judge barked suddenly, his voice cracking. "You have no right to—" Before he could finish, two men in dark suits rose from the back row and walked calmly toward the bench. The taller of the two reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a badge. "Judge Harold Morrison," the agent said in a firm, commanding tone, "you are under arrest for corruption, bribery, and obstruction of justice." Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Reporters scrambled to their feet, snapping photos and shouting questions. The once mighty judge froze in disbelief, staring at the agents as if this was some kind of nightmare. You can't arrest me," he stammered. "I'm a sitting judge. You have no jurisdiction here." The agent stepped closer. "We do now, sir. You've been under investigation for months." He gestured to the bailiff. "Please remove his gavel and escort him down." For a moment, no one moved. It was surreal. The same man who once controlled this courtroom with authority and arrogance now sat trembling, pale, and powerless. Pam stood silently, her hands clasped in front of her. She didn't gloat, didn't smirk, didn't say a word. Her expression remained calm, almost solemn, as justice unfolded before her eyes. The agents guided Morrison from his chair, placed him in handcuffs, and began leading him toward the exit. The cameras flashed so rapidly that the whole room seemed to sparkle with light. As he passed by Pam, he stopped for a brief second. His eyes met hers, angry, embarrassed, defeated. "You did this," he muttered bitterly. Pam looked at him evenly and said, "No, Your Honor, you did this." That simple statement hit harder than anything she could have shouted. Morrison dropped his gaze and kept walking as the agents escorted him out. The courtroom was chaos. Reporters yelling questions, the public gasping, the clerk whispering to the bailiff in disbelief. Through it all, Pam remained motionless, like a calm center in the middle of a storm. She turned to the press for a brief moment and said, "This isn't about revenge. It's about integrity. No one, not even a judge, is above the law." And with that, she gathered her papers and quietly left the courtroom.
Outside, the scene was just as chaotic. Dozens of reporters swarmed around her, shouting over one another for a comment. Microphones were shoved toward her face, cameras followed her every step. "Miss Bondi, did you plan this?" one reporter shouted. Pam paused, turning slightly toward the crowd. Her expression softened just enough to let a hint of a smile show. "No," she said. "Justice doesn't need to be planned. It just needs someone brave enough to stand up for it." And with that, she walked down the courthouse steps, leaving behind the flashing lights and chaos. The clip of that moment spread across the internet within hours, seen by millions. The once feared judge had fallen, and the woman he tried to humiliate had stood tall, calm, composed, and victorious. Pam Bondi didn't just win a battle that day. She reminded the world that the truth always wins, no matter how powerful the liar may seem.
Outside the courthouse, chaos erupted. Cameras flashed like lightning, microphones were thrust forward, and reporters shouted from every direction. The moment Pam Bondi stepped out of the courtroom, the crowd surged toward her. "Miss Bondi, over here! Pam, how did you pull this off? Did you plan Judge Morrison's arrest?" The air was electric with excitement. Everyone wanted a soundbite from the woman who had just exposed one of the state's most powerful judges. Pam stood still for a moment, letting the noise settle just a little. Then, with a calm smile, she looked toward the cameras. "No," she said simply, her voice firm but graceful. "Justice doesn't need to be planned. It just needs someone brave enough to stand up for it." The crowd went silent for a split second, and then the questions started again, louder than before. But Pam didn't stay. She gave a polite nod, turned away, and walked down the courthouse steps, her expression poised and unshaken. That short clip, just 10 seconds long, would soon explode across the internet. Within hours, it was everywhere: TikTok, YouTube, Twitter, and television broadcasts. The caption read, "Pam Bondi takes down a corrupt judge with class." Millions of people watched it, mesmerized by her composure. Some called her fearless. Others said she had restored their faith in justice. Even her critics, those who had once accused her of chasing fame, began to praise her integrity. News channels ran headlines like, "The woman who took down a corrupt judge," "Pam Bondi, from insulted to iconic," "Calm, confident, and unstoppable, Bondi strikes back." Everywhere she went, people recognized her. In cafes, airports, and even grocery stores, strangers stopped to thank her for standing up to corruption. "You gave us hope," one woman told her tearfully. But Pam didn't let the attention change her. She knew fame was temporary, truth wasn't. Behind closed doors, she continued to work quietly with federal investigators, ensuring that Judge Morrison's case would hold up in court. She wanted his conviction to be about justice, not publicity. Weeks passed, but the media storm began to calm down, but the story still lingered in people's hearts. That's when Pam received an invitation to appear on a national television show, a serious, respected news program known for its in-depth interviews. At first, she hesitated. She didn't want to seem like she was capitalizing on the scandal. But after some thought, she agreed, not to celebrate herself, but to remind people why truth still mattered. The studio was quiet when she arrived. Cameras were set up, lights were bright, and the host, a well-known journalist, greeted her warmly. "Pam, thank you for being here," he said as they took their seats. "Thank you for having me," she replied politely. The interview began gently. Questions about her career, her time as Attorney General, and her motivations for taking difficult cases. But soon the conversation turned to Judge Morrison. "Pam," the interviewer asked, leaning forward, "you were humiliated in that courtroom, insulted in front of the nation, yet you never lost your composure. How did you stay calm?" Pam paused for a moment. She looked down briefly, gathering her thoughts, then raised her eyes toward the camera.
When someone disrespects you, you have two choices: react with anger or respond with truth. I chose truth. The room went quiet. Even the interviewer seemed moved by her words. He smiled slightly. "And it seems," he said, "that truth set you free." Pam smiled back, calm and graceful as ever. "It did," she said, "and it set justice free too." That line became one of the most quoted phrases of the year. News outlets replayed it over and over. Motivational speakers cited it in their talks. Students used it in essays about integrity and courage. Even in the legal world, her actions sent ripples. Several states began quietly reviewing judicial conduct, tightening rules around financial disclosures. What started as one woman's determination to expose a corrupt judge had now sparked a broader movement for accountability. But for Pam, it wasn't about fame, attention, or even revenge. Late one night, as she sat in her office surrounded by files and case notes, she reflected on how everything had unfolded. She didn't smile or celebrate. She simply whispered to herself, "Justice always finds a way." She knew that she hadn't just won a legal fight, she had restored a little faith in the system, something people desperately needed. A few days later, she received a handwritten letter from a young law student. It read, "Miss Bondi, I used to believe honesty doesn't matter in this world, but after seeing what you did, I've decided to study law because I want to be like you." Pam read the letter twice, folded it gently, and placed it in her drawer. It was the only trophy she needed. The scandal faded with time, but her story didn't. People still remembered the day Pam Bondi walked out of that room fearless and victorious, proving once and for all that no matter how powerful corruption seems, the truth will always stand taller.